Now, if you'd told Staff Sergeant Knox Montgomery that morning he'd be playing nursemaid to alien cubs by noon, he'd have recommended you for a psychological evaluation. But then again, war has a way of making the impossible seem like just another Tuesday, doesn't it? The Cathon military base was having what you might generously call a bad day. Enemy forces had been pounding their defenses for 18 hours straight, and the humans were down to their last functioning shield generator. The kind of situation where even the optimists start writing farewell letters, if you catch my drift. Knox was crouched behind what used to be the communications array, now serving as very expensive rubble, when the sky literally cracked open. Not metaphorically, mind you. The actual air split apart, like someone had taken a cosmic can opener to reality itself. "What the hell?" Corporal Nadia Okonkwo started to say, but the words died in her throat as something massive came tumbling through the dimensional rift. Something that landed with enough force to crater the landing pad and send every human soldier diving for cover. Private Jamie Hutchinson, bless his eternally curious soul, was the first to poke his head up. "Sarge, is that thing supposed to be smoking like that?" The thing in question was roughly the size of a small building, covered in what looked like organic armor plating, and yes, it was definitely smoking. More concerning was the fact that it was moving, unfolding itself from the crash position like some enormous, wounded animal. And that's exactly what it was. Alpha Hawktar stood nearly 12 feet tall when he finally managed to get upright, which took considerable effort given the gaping wound in his side that was leaking something that definitely wasn't ketchup. His species, the Cathonians, looked like someone had crossed a wolf with a dragon, and then given the result a PhD in looking absolutely terrifying. Scales that shifted from deep blue to silver depending on the light, eyes like molten gold, and teeth that could probably bite through tank armor. "Well," Knox muttered, raising his rifle despite knowing it would be about as effective as throwing pebbles, "this day just keeps getting better." The Alpha's head snapped toward the sound, those golden eyes locking onto Knox with an intensity that made the sergeant's survival instincts scream. But instead of the expected roar or charge or whatever it is 12-foot alien predators do when they're having a bad day, Hawktar did something that made every human present question their grip on reality. He spoke, in perfect, unaccented English. "Human soldiers," the Alpha said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made generals stand straighter. "I require your assistance." Now, Knox had been in the military for 15 years. He'd seen combat on 4 different worlds, survived 3 different apocalypses, and once spent a memorable weekend trapped in a bunker with nothing but ration packs and a politician's memoir for entertainment. He thought he'd seen everything. He was wrong. "Assistance?" Nadia stepped forward, apparently deciding that if they were all going to die horribly, she might as well satisfy her curiosity first. "Sir, with all due respect, you're about 10 times our size and bleeding what looks like liquid starlight. What could we possibly help you with?" Hawktar's expression, and yes, alien faces can have expressions, who knew, shifted to something that might have been desperation. "My cubs. I must leave them somewhere safe while I lead the final assault against the Void Hunters." Knox blinked several times. "Cubs? You want us to babysit? Your children?" "The enemy has breached our primary defenses," Hawktar continued, ignoring the humans' obvious confusion. "In 3 hours, they will overrun our last stronghold. I must rally the remaining warriors for a final push, but I cannot bring the cubs into battle. They are all I have left." And there it was. The note in that impossibly deep voice that transcended species barriers. Any parent would recognize it instantly. The sound of someone who'd already lost too much and couldn't bear to lose more. Jamie, who despite being the youngest member of their unit, had always been too soft-hearted for his own good, lowered his weapon entirely. How old are they? By your standards, perhaps 10, 8, and 6 of your years. Hawktar's golden eyes dimmed slightly. Their mother fell in the first wave. They have been alone while I fought to hold the lines. Knox felt something inside his chest do an uncomfortable little twist. He'd joined the military to fight enemies, not to run an interspecies daycare center, but the way the Alpha was looking at them, like they were his last hope in a universe that had already taken everything else. "Sarge," Nadia said quietly, "our orders are to hold this position and await extraction. We've got maybe 6 hours before the evac ships arrive. We could—" "Absolutely not," Knox interrupted, then paused as he realized what he'd just said. "I mean, absolutely not. Should we turn away someone asking for help? Damn it." He looked up at the towering alien. "Where are they?" Hawktar's relief was palpable, his massive shoulders sagging slightly. "They are hidden in my ship. I will retrieve them." As the Alpha limped back toward his crashed vessel, Knox turned to his squad. "Okay, quick show of hands. Who here has any experience with children?" Silence. "Right. Anyone have experience with alien children who might be able to bite our heads off?" More silence. "Outstanding. Well, how hard can it be?" Famous last words, really. The cubs that Hawktar carried back were not what anyone had expected. For starters, they were small. Not human child small, mind you, but compared to their father's imposing bulk, they looked positively delicate. They moved with a liquid grace that suggested they were far from helpless, and their eyes, the same molten gold as their father's, held an intelligence that made Knox distinctly uncomfortable. Nim, the only female and apparently the eldest, regarded the humans with open curiosity. Her scales showed more green than her father's blue, and she had what looked like natural markings around her eyes that gave her an almost scholarly appearance. "These are the humans who will guard us, Father." "Yes, little star. They have agreed to keep you safe while I fight." Hawktar knelt, a process that took considerable effort given his wounds, and nuzzled each cub in turn. The gesture was so tender, so universal, that Knox felt that uncomfortable twist in his chest again. Beck, the middle cub, was stockier than his siblings and had markings that looked almost like war paint. He eyed the human soldiers with obvious skepticism. "They are very small, Father. How can such small creatures protect anything?" "Size is not everything, my son. These humans have held their ground against impossible odds. They understand duty." Hawktar's gaze met Knox's. "And honor." The smallest cub, Oho, hadn't spoken yet. He stayed close to Nim, his enormous eyes taking in everything around him with an intensity that made Knox think of recording devices. There was something about the way the little one watched that suggested he was filing away every detail for later analysis. "Right then," Knox said, trying to project more confidence than he felt. "We'll set up a secure perimeter in the command bunker. It's the most fortified position we've got." Hawktar nodded, then did something that caught all the humans off guard. He knelt again, this time addressing Knox directly. "Staff Sergeant Knox Montgomery, I entrust you with my most precious treasures. Should I fall in battle, know that their lives are worth more to me than all the stars in the sky." "You're not going to fall," Knox said firmly, surprised by his own conviction. "You're going to kick whatever's out there straight back to whatever hole it crawled out of. And then you're coming back for them. Understood? For the first time since his dramatic arrival, Hawktar almost smiled. Understood, human. The Alpha's departure was, well, spectacular would be putting it mildly. He launched himself into the air with a roar that shook the remaining structures, wings that Nox hadn't even noticed spreading from his back to catch the wind. Within moments, he was just a speck against the burning sky. So, Nadia said into the sudden silence, anyone want to guess what alien children eat? Nox looked down at the three cubs, who were now his responsibility, whether he liked it or not. Nim was already wandering toward the damaged communications equipment with obvious interest. Beck was testing the weight of a discarded rifle, a weapon nearly as big as he was, and Oho was still just watching everything. I have a feeling, Nox muttered, we're about to find out. What none of them knew, what they couldn't possibly have known, was that they'd just agreed to babysit three of the most dangerous beings in the known galaxy. But hey, where's the fun in spoiling the surprise? You know that old saying about the best-laid plans? Well, Nox's plan lasted exactly 12 minutes, which, considering they were dealing with alien children, was probably some kind of record. It started innocently enough. The cubs had followed the humans into the command bunker without complaint, settling into what looked like a respectful huddle near the emergency supplies. Nox was just starting to think this might actually be manageable when Nim tilted her head and asked, "Why is your communication system so primitive?" Primitive? Nadia glanced at the jury-rigged equipment they'd been nursing along for the past day. It's military-grade hardware, top of the line. Nim's expression, and yes, alien cubs apparently mastered the art of looking politely skeptical at a very young age, suggested she had opinions about human technology. May I examine it? Now, Nox should have said no. Any reasonable military commander would have said no. But there was something about the way she asked, curious rather than demanding, scholarly rather than condescending, that made him nod before his brain could catch up. Just don't break anything else, okay? We're down to backup systems as it is. What happened next would haunt Nox's dreams for years to come. Not in a bad way, mind you, but in the way that watching a master artist work haunts you, with the uncomfortable realization that you've been doing everything wrong your entire life. Nim approached the communications array like a concert pianist approaching a particularly challenging piece. Her scaled fingers, which Nox now noticed ended in retractable claws, began dancing across interfaces that should have been completely alien to her. Within minutes, static-filled channels were crystal clear, dead frequencies were crackling back to life, and the entire system was running at efficiency levels that the manufacturer had probably only dreamed about. "There," she said, stepping back with obvious satisfaction. "Now you can actually hear what your allies are saying." Nox stared at the readouts, then at Nim, then back at the readouts. "How did you—" "We've been working on those repairs for 2 days." "Your species thinks very linearly," Nim said, not unkindly. "You try to fix each component individually instead of treating the system as a living network. It's like trying to heal a body by treating each cell separately instead of addressing the whole organism." "Right," Nox said faintly. "Of course, living networks. Why didn't I think of that?" While Nox was still processing this casual display of technical mastery, Beck had wandered over to where Jamie was cleaning his rifle. The young private looked up to find the alien cub studying the weapon with obvious interest. "It's a pulse rifle," Jamie offered helpfully. "Standard issue. Want to see how it works." What Jamie expected was maybe some childlike curiosity, perhaps a few questions about the pretty lights. What he got was Beck hefting the weapon, which weighed nearly as much as the cub did, and immediately identifying 3 design flaws that reduced its effectiveness by 30%. "Your trigger mechanism creates unnecessary delay," Beck said matter-of-factly, "and this grip configuration puts stress on the wrong muscle groups. Also, why do you only have one targeting mode? That seems wastefully limiting." Jamie blinked. "Wastefully limiting? Watch." Beck's hands, which were apparently far more dexterous than they appeared, began manipulating the rifle's components with surgical precision. Within moments, he'd somehow reconfigured the entire weapon system. "Try it now." Jamie raised the modified rifle, and his eyes went wide. The targeting display was showing information he'd never seen before. Wind compensation, predictive tracking, even what looked like weak point analysis for different target types. This is impossible. These components shouldn't be able to do this." "They always could," Beck said with a shrug that was somehow both casual and slightly condescending. "You just weren't asking them the right questions." Knox was beginning to develop a headache, or possibly an existential crisis. It was getting hard to tell the difference. But it was Oho who delivered the real blow to human confidence. The smallest cub had been quietly observing everything, and when Knox said everything, he meant everything. Every conversation, every equipment check, every tactical discussion the humans had held since arriving at the base. "Staff Sergeant Montgomery," Oho said in his soft, precise voice, "you're going to be attacked in approximately 2 hours and 18 minutes. The command bunker went very, very quiet. "Come again?" Knox managed. Oho's golden eyes remained fixed on some middle distance, as if he were reading from an invisible screen. "The enemy has been monitoring your communications, not the encrypted channels. Those are secure, but the maintenance frequencies you've been using to coordinate repairs. They now know your exact defensive capabilities, personnel count, and ammunition levels." Nadia felt her blood chill. The maintenance frequencies aren't supposed to carry tactical information. They don't, directly. But the pattern of your repair requests, the timing of equipment failures, the locations where you've requested technical support, it all creates a picture of your true situation. Oho finally looked at her directly. "You have 31 functional soldiers, ammunition for perhaps 45 minutes of sustained combat, and your shield generator will fail. Completely, after absorbing approximately 800 more direct hits." Knox stared at the small alien child who had just recited their exact tactical situation with casual precision. "How could you possibly know all that?" "I listen," Oho said simply. "Your people talk constantly, and numbers don't lie. Based on current attack patterns, the enemy will begin their final assault when they calculate you have exactly enough ammunition left to make them work for the victory, but not enough to actually achieve one." The silence that followed was the kind that usually preceded either brilliant revelations or complete mental breakdowns. "Okay," Knox said slowly. "Okay, let's say you're right. What do we do about it?" And that's when all 3 cubs looked at each other and smiled. Not the innocent smiles of children, mind you, but the satisfied smiles of experts who had finally been asked the right question. "Well," Nim said, her claws already extending toward the communications array, "first we need to fix your real problems. Then," Beck added, hefting Jamie's modified rifle with obvious anticipation, "we show your soldiers how weapons are supposed to work. And finally," Oho concluded with the kind of calm certainty that generals would kill for, "we teach you how to fight a battle you can actually win." Knox looked at his two fellow humans, both of whom appeared to be having the same thought he was. They weren't babysitting alien cubs. They were being tutored by alien prodigies. "Right then," Knox said, surprising himself with how steady his voice sounded. "School's in session. What's lesson 1? The next hour and a half passed in a blur of activity that would have impressed a military academy's entire teaching staff. Nim didn't just repair their communications, she transformed them into something that belonged on a flagship command vessel. Suddenly they had real-time tactical overlays, predictive threat analysis, and communication links to allied units they hadn't even known were in the area. Beck, meanwhile, was conducting what could only be described as a master class in applied violence. He took apart every weapon in their arsenal and put them back together as devices that would have made their original designers weep with envy. Rifles that could adapt their firing modes based on target analysis, sidearms that could punch through armor plating, grenades that could actually think about where they wanted to explode. But it was Oho who truly earned his keep. The smallest cub had somehow turned their desperate defensive position into a tactical masterpiece. He showed them blind spots in their own perimeter they'd never noticed, firing positions that would give them overlapping fields of coverage, and, most importantly, exactly how to make their limited ammunition count for maximum effect. "The enemy expects you to fight like humans," Oho explained, as he helped Knox reposition their remaining heavy weapons. "They've studied your tactics, your psychological profiles, your historical battle patterns. They know exactly how human soldiers respond to overwhelming odds." "And how's that?" Nadia asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Bravely, but predictably. You'll hold your positions until the last possible moment, then fall back to secondary defenses, fighting harder as the situation becomes more desperate." Oho's eyes gleamed with something that looked suspiciously like anticipation. They're counting on that pattern. Knox was beginning to see where this was going. "But we're not going to fight like humans, are we?" "No," all three cubs said in unison, their smiles showing just a few too many teeth to be entirely comfortable. "You're going to fight like Chthonians," Beck said, and there was definite pride in his voice. And that's when Knox realized they'd been looking at this all wrong from the beginning. They weren't three human soldiers babysitting alien cubs while waiting for evacuation. They were three human students about to receive a crash course in interstellar warfare from instructors who had been born for battle. The enemy was in for a very unpleasant surprise. Now, if you've never seen three alien cubs orchestrate a complete transformation of military doctrine in under 90 minutes, you haven't lived. Knox was pretty sure he was watching something that would either go down in military history or get him court-martialed for allowing children to redesign their entire defensive strategy. Possibly both. "No, no, no," Nim said, her claws clicking against the holographic display she'd somehow coaxed out of their ancient tactical computer. "You're still thinking in 2 dimensions. The enemy will expect you to defend from ground level, because that's what humans do. But why limit yourselves to human expectations?" Knox studied the 3-dimensional battlefield layout that Nim had created, complete with enemy approach vectors, defensive positions, and what appeared to be real-time probability calculations. "Because we can't fly?" "You don't need to fly," Beck interjected, from where he was showing Jamie how to recalibrate their heavy weapons for maximum psychological impact. "You just need to think vertically. Show them." Nim's display shifted, and suddenly Knox could see what the cubs were getting at. Their base wasn't just a collection of bunkers and defensive walls, it was the center of a 3-dimensional puzzle that could be turned inside out if you knew the right tricks. Your builders were cleverer than your current tacticians give them credit for, Oho said, his small fingers dancing across controls that shouldn't have been able to interface with alien technology. This entire complex was designed with modular defensive capabilities. Watch! The display showed the base's superstructure beginning to shift and reconfigure. Walls that had seemed permanent revealed themselves as movable barriers. Defensive positions that appeared fixed could actually be repositioned to create interlocking fields of fire from completely unexpected angles. Even the rubble from earlier attacks could be weaponized if you knew how to manipulate the underlying support systems. Holy! Nadia caught herself before she finished the curse, glancing at the cubs apologetically. "We've heard worse," Nim said with amusement. "Father's vocabulary becomes quite colorful during battle. But you understand now, yes? The enemy has spent hours studying your static defenses. They have no data on what happens when those defenses become dynamic." Nox felt something that might have been hope beginning to stir in his chest. "Can we actually do this? Reconfigure the base structure in—" He checked his chronometer. 63 minutes. With the right motivation, humans can accomplish remarkable things in very little time, Oho said solemnly. And I believe being shot at provides excellent motivation. The next hour was controlled chaos of the highest order. Nox had seen experienced engineering crews work before, but he'd never seen anything like what happened when human determination met alien innovation. Nim had somehow patched into the base's construction systems that Nox hadn't even known existed, and was directing structural changes with the precision of a conductor leading a symphony. Meanwhile, Beck had turned weapons maintenance into something approaching an art form. Every rifle, every sidearm, every piece of military hardware in their arsenal was being systematically upgraded using techniques that definitely weren't in any human manual. The young alien seemed to understand the fundamental principles behind human weapons better than the people who'd designed them. "Your species has an interesting approach to combat engineering," Beck commented as he handed Jamie back his rifle, now sporting modifications that made it look like it belonged in a science fiction movie. "Very intuitive. You build weapons based on what feels right, rather than what calculates right." "And that's bad?" Jamie asked, testing the weapon's new weight distribution. "Not bad. Different. Unpredictable. Your enemies prepare for logical weapons wielded by logical soldiers. They don't prepare for intuitive weapons wielded by creative soldiers." Beck's golden eyes gleamed. "It's going to be educational for them." But it was Oho who was orchestrating the real masterpiece. The smallest cub had taken their desperate last stand and transformed it into something that looked suspiciously like a trap. Not just any trap, mind you, but the kind of multi-layered, psychologically devastating trap that military academies would study for decades afterward. "The first wave will break against your outer perimeter exactly as they expect," Oho explained to Nox and Nadia as they watched the defensive preparations taking shape. "They'll take casualties, but they'll push through because their models predict that's where you'll make your primary stand." "But we won't," Nox said, beginning to see the pattern. "Correct. You'll fall back to what appears to be secondary positions, following standard human tactical doctrine. The enemy will advance, confident that they're forcing you to react according to their timeline." Oho's smile was starting to remind Nox of his grandfather's chess-playing expression, the one that usually meant someone was about to lose very badly. "That's when the base reconfigures itself around them." Nadia whistled softly. "We're not just changing our defensive positions, we're changing the entire battlefield." "While they're trapped in the middle of it," Nox added, feeling a grin spreading across his face. They'll be fighting in a maze that keeps shifting around them, against opponents using weapons they've never seen before, led by tactics they can't predict. "Now you're beginning to think like Chthonians," Nim said approvingly. "War isn't just about superior firepower. It's about superior adaptation, making your enemy fight the battle you want to fight, not the battle they prepared for." The chronometer showed 18 minutes until the estimated attack time, when the Cubs called for a final tactical briefing. Knox gathered his small force, 31 soldiers who were about to attempt something that military historians would probably call either brilliant or insane, and tried to project confidence he was only beginning to feel. "Right then," he began, looking out at faces that showed the kind of grim determination that came with knowing you were probably going to die, but deciding to make it count. "I'm not going to lie to you. What we're about to attempt has never been tried before, and we're basing our entire strategy on the advice of 3 consultants, who are technically still children." Several soldiers glanced at the Cubs, who were huddled together near the main tactical display, looking for all the world like ordinary kids, plotting something mildly mischievous. "However," Knox continued, "these particular children happen to know more about warfare than our entire command structure combined. They've just spent the last 2 hours turning us from a desperate last stand into something the enemy definitely isn't prepared for." He gestured to the modified weapons, the reconfigured defenses, the tactical displays showing battle plans that looked like they belonged in a much more advanced military. "We're not fighting as humans today. We're fighting as something new, something better." Jamie raised his hand. "Sarge, what if this doesn't work?" Knox considered the question seriously. "Then we go down swinging with the best weapons, the best tactics, and the best backup we've ever had. But I don't think it's going to come to that." He looked at the Cubs, who were now openly listening to the briefing, with expressions of professional interest. "I think we're about to show the galaxy what happens when human adaptability meets Chthonian innovation." The attack, when it came, was everything they'd expected, and nothing the enemy had prepared for. The first wave hit their outer perimeter with textbook precision, expecting to face the kind of desperate but predictable resistance that human forces were known for. What they got instead was a wall of weapons fire that adapted to their tactics in real time, delivered by soldiers who seemed to know exactly where each enemy would be before they got there. Knox watched from the command center as their enhanced weapons systems tore through the attacking force with efficiency that bordered on the artistic. "Oho, how are you calling their movements so precisely?" "Pattern recognition," the young alien replied, without taking his eyes off the tactical display. "Every species has behavioral patterns when under stress. The enemy commanders are making decisions based on their analysis of human psychology, which means their choices become predictable once you understand their analytical framework." "He's reading their minds by reading their tactics," Nadia translated, sounding slightly stunned. "More or less," Oho agreed. "First wave is breaking now. They'll retreat to minimum safe distance and call in their second wave, a flanking maneuver from the northeast, designed to exploit what they believe is a weakness in human defensive psychology." Knox watched the enemy forces pull back exactly as Oho had predicted. "And is it? A weakness, I mean?" "It was," Nim said from her position at the communications array. "Human commanders traditionally struggle with managing multiple threat vectors simultaneously. But you're not fighting as pure humans anymore." The base's superstructure began to shift around them, walls sliding into new configurations as the defensive network reconfigured itself for the next phase of battle. Knox felt a moment of vertigo as their command center rotated 30 degrees to face the new primary threat axis. "Brace yourselves," Beck called out. "The second wave is going to be confused and angry. Confused and angry enemies make excellent targets." The flanking attack materialized exactly where Oho had predicted, but instead of finding the vulnerable secondary positions they expected, the enemy forces ran straight into what could only be described as a killing field designed by someone with a very unpleasant sense of humor. Knox watched his soldiers, armed with weapons that could think, positioned in defenses that could adapt, guided by tactics that could evolve, systematically dismantle an enemy force that outnumbered them 4-1. "This is impossible," he muttered, watching the casualty reports stream across his display. "We shouldn't be winning this decisively." "You're not winning as humans," Oho said matter-of-factly. "You're winning as something better, something the enemy has no reference frame for." That's when the real surprise revealed itself. As the second wave crumbled under their impossible defense, Knox's communications array, Nim's communications array, began picking up transmissions that made his blood run cold. "Knox," Nadia said urgently, "we're getting reports from Allied units across the sector. They're all describing the same thing. Coordinated attacks by the same enemy forces, all happening simultaneously." Knox felt pieces of a much larger puzzle beginning to click into place. "How many bases are under attack?" "All of them," Nim said quietly. "Every human military installation in this sector. The enemy isn't just trying to overrun individual positions. They're conducting a comprehensive evaluation of human defensive capabilities." "Evaluation?" Knox's voice was very calm, which anyone who knew him would recognize as a dangerous sign. "They're testing you," Beck said, his expression grim. "All of you. Analyzing how human forces respond to overwhelming odds. Cataloging your weapons, your tactics, your psychological breaking points." Oho nodded solemnly. "This entire offensive is a data-gathering operation. They're preparing for something much larger." Knox stared at the tactical display showing their impossible victory against impossible odds, and suddenly understood exactly what they'd stumbled into. "They're not trying to destroy us," he said slowly. "They're trying to understand us, to see if we're worth what? Recruitment? Partnership? Or elimination?" The three cubs exchanged glances that were far too knowing for children. "That," Nim said carefully, "is a very perceptive question, Staff Sergeant Knox Montgomery." And that's when Knox realized they'd been playing a much deeper game than anyone had suspected. The question was, whose side were they really on? The return of Alpha Hawktar was nothing like his departure. Where he'd left as a desperate father fleeing with mortal wounds, he came back as something that looked suspiciously like a general conducting a victory inspection. His landing was controlled, graceful, and accompanied by what could only be described as a fleet of Chthonian warships that definitely hadn't been there before. Knox watched the Alpha approach their transformed base and felt his suspicions crystallizing into something approaching certainty. This had all been planned. Every minute of it. "Father!" Nim called out, bounding toward Hawktar with obvious joy. But Knox noticed something interesting. She wasn't running toward him like a relieved child. She was moving like a subordinate reporting to a superior officer. "Excellent work, little star," Hawktar said, but his golden eyes were scanning the modified base structure, the enhanced weapons positions, the tactical displays that were still showing their impossible victory statistics. "Your assessment was correct, then." "Beyond our most optimistic projections," Oho said, stepping forward with a datapad that he definitely hadn't had a few hours ago. "Human adaptive capabilities exceed all previous modeling. Tactical flexibility, technological integration. psychological resilience under pressure. All parameters showed remarkable improvement when properly guided. Knox felt something cold settle in his stomach. Properly guided? Beck had the grace to look slightly apologetic. Staff Sergeant Montgomery, there are some things we perhaps should have mentioned earlier. You think? Nadia's voice had gone very flat, very dangerous. Start talking. Now. Hawktar regarded the three human soldiers with what might have been respect or possibly amusement. My cubs are not children, in the sense you understand the term. Nim is our foremost tactical systems analyst. Beck leads our weapons development division. And Ojo, he placed a massive hand on the smallest cub's shoulder. Ojo is the youngest being ever admitted to the Chthonian High Command Strategic Planning Council. The silence that followed was the kind that usually preceded either diplomatic incidents or homicide charges. So, Knox said with remarkable calm, when you said they were 10, 8, and 6 years old. By Chthonian development standards, they are, Hawktar replied. What you failed to understand is that we mature intellectually far faster than physically. These three have been conducting theoretical warfare studies since they could walk. Jamie made a sound that might have been laughter or might have been a nervous breakdown. We've been babysitting the alien equivalent of PhD candidates in military science? Worse, Nim said, looking genuinely apologetic now. I hold the equivalent of what you would call multiple advanced degrees in systems integration and cyber warfare. Beck has published several papers on adaptive weapons theory that are considered foundational texts in our military academies. And Oho, Beck added, once designed a battle strategy that ended a 3-century conflict in 8 hours. He was 4 at the time. Knox sat down heavily on a piece of rubble that had once been their communications array. Right, okay. So, when you asked us to watch your children, I asked you to protect my most valuable military advisors while they conducted a comprehensive evaluation of human military potential, Hawktar said, which they have done brilliantly. Evaluation. Nadia's grip on her weapon had tightened considerably. That word keeps coming up. Evaluation for what? The Alpha's expression grew serious. The Void Hunters you helped us defeat today were not the real threat. They were scouts for something much worse. A force that seeks to eliminate any species they deem potentially dangerous to their expansion plans. And humans are potentially dangerous? Knox asked. Spectacularly so, Oho said, with enthusiasm that was somehow both childlike and terrifying. Your species shows unprecedented ability to adapt alien technology to your own needs, to integrate foreign tactical concepts with native innovation, and to exceed performance predictions under stress. In simple terms, Hawktar continued, you are exactly the kind of ally we need for the war that's coming. But the Galactic Defense Coalition needed proof that humans could function effectively as part of integrated interstellar forces. Nim nodded eagerly. So we designed a test, a scenario where human soldiers would be forced to work directly with Chthonian tactical doctrine using hybrid technology under maximum stress conditions. You turned us into guinea pigs, Knox said flatly. We turned you into partners, Beck corrected. The weapons modifications, the tactical innovations, the strategic frameworks we taught you, those are now permanently part of your skill set. You can't unlearn what you've learned. Knox looked at his modified rifle, at the tactical displays that were still showing impossible victory statistics, at his own soldiers who were moving with a confidence and precision they'd never possessed before. And if we'd failed the test? Then we would have evacuated you safely and looked elsewhere for allies. Hawktar said simply. But you didn't fail. You exceeded every parameter we established. In fact, Oho added with obvious pride, your performance was so impressive that the Coalition has authorized immediate integration protocols. Integration protocols? Nadia asked suspiciously. That's when the real surprise revealed itself. The Chthonian warships that had been hovering at a respectful distance began to descend, and Nox could see that they weren't just military vessels. They were transports, carrying what looked like construction equipment and enough personnel to build a small city. The Coalition has decided to establish a joint human Chthonian training facility here, Hawktar explained, a place where both species can learn from each other, develop hybrid technologies, and prepare for the challenges ahead. Nox felt his worldview shifting again. And us? The three of us who supposedly just happened to be here when you crashed? We'll be the first graduates of the new program, Nim said with obvious satisfaction. And, if you're willing, the first human instructors. Instructors? Jamie squeaked. You've successfully integrated Chthonian military doctrine with human tactical flexibility, Beck explained. That makes you uniquely qualified to teach other humans how to do the same thing. Nox looked at his two fellow soldiers, both of whom appeared to be processing the same thought he was. So, instead of being evacuated back to Earth, you'll be staying here to help train the joint forces that will defend both our species, Hawktar confirmed. If you choose to accept the position. The silence stretched for several long moments. Then Nadia started to laugh. Not hysterical laughter, but the kind of amazed chuckling that comes with finally understanding a joke that's been building for hours. Let me get this straight, she said. We thought we were babysitting alien children. They thought they were evaluating human military potential. We both ended up teaching each other things neither species knew they could learn. And now we're all going to work together to fight something even worse than what we just defeated, Nox added. Is that about the size of it? That's exactly the size of it, Oho confirmed solemnly. Nox stood up, looking out at the base that had been transformed around them, at the soldiers who had been transformed within it, at the 3 alien cubs who had orchestrated the entire impossible day. Well, he said finally, I've had worse assignments. 6 months later, Staff Sergeant Knox Montgomery stood at attention as the first graduating class of the Joint Human Chthonian Military Academy prepared for their commissioning ceremony. Beside him, Corporal Nadia Okonkwo and Private, now Lieutenant Jamie Hutchinson, watched with pride as their students prepared to take their oaths. The graduates were a sight to behold. Humans and Chthonians standing together in perfect formation, carrying weapons that were marvels of hybrid engineering, trained in tactics that no single species could have developed alone. They moved with a precision that spoke of shared knowledge and mutual respect. At the front of the formation, 3 familiar figures called out commands in perfect synchronization. Nim, Beck, and Oho had grown in the intervening months, but they still looked impossibly young to be giving orders to soldiers twice their size. Remember, Nim called out to the assembled graduates, integration doesn't mean abandoning what makes your species unique. It means combining those unique strengths into something greater than the sum of its parts. Your weapons are tools, Beck added, but your greatest weapon is your ability to adapt, to learn, to become more than you were yesterday. And most importantly, Oho concluded, never forget that the greatest victories come not from defeating your enemies, but from turning them into allies. Nox smiled as he watched the ceremony proceed. The cubs had been right about one thing. Humans were spectacularly dangerous, but not in the way anyone had expected. They were dangerous because they could take the best of any species they encountered and make it part of themselves. They were dangerous because they could teach others to do the same. And they were dangerous because once they decided you were family, they would fight to protect you with everything they had. As the new graduates raised their hands to take their oaths, Knox caught sight of Alpha Hawktar watching from the reviewing stand. The massive alien was looking at the mixed formation with obvious pride. But when his eyes met Knox's, he nodded with something that looked suspiciously like respect. The Alpha had left his cubs with human soldiers. They had returned leading a formation that would change the galaxy forever. Not bad for a day's work. And so ends the tale of the greatest babysitting assignment in galactic history. 3 human soldiers, who thought they were protecting alien children instead, found themselves adopted by alien generals who had been evaluating their species for integration into something larger than any of them had imagined. The irony, of course, is delicious. Knox, Nadia, and Jamie spent their day teaching cubs about human resilience and adaptability, while Nim, Beck, and Oho spent theirs teaching humans about strategic thinking and technological integration. Neither side realized they were both student and teacher until the lesson was complete. Today, the joint Human-Chthonian Academy produces the finest hybrid warriors the galaxy has ever seen. Soldiers who think like humans but fight like Chthonians. Tacticians who combine alien precision with human unpredictability. Leaders who understand that the strongest formations aren't built from single species, but from the spaces where different strengths overlap. The Cubs never did get their babysitters back. Instead, they got something better. Partners who proved that the most dangerous thing in the universe isn't superior firepower or advanced technology. It's the willingness to learn from anyone, even alien children who turn out to be military prodigies in disguise. Especially them.